Breaking news from Anthropic, the most powerful model ever, was released. But let the BBC announce it. Version of AI tool too powerful for public, released to public. This is the famous Mythos model, has now made its way to the public. I have used it. We have our initial reactions, but let me cut to the chase. It's really good. And it's been released in a slightly safer mode, which is being called Fable. So Anthropic has released their most powerful model, and they've benchmarked it. It's far better than what we had before on the benchmark. But Ian, you just created a pretty complex new application.
I did.
From scratch. And you released it an hour ago, and this thing's like 3 hours old.
Yeah.
Take us through your experience with Fable.
Yes, maybe I'll share here, but always go to breakneckpodcast.com. We always share this stuff since we launched the site, but I am going to share with you what I did. If you listen along, you know that I like racing cars, and one of the fun things you get to do is collect a bunch of data in real time off these vehicles, and you look at it afterwards and you visualize it. Pretty complex data. There's a lot of stuff going on from a user interaction perspective. There's an existing user model, but it's fairly complex to set up and understand. So I gave Fable 5 a one-shot prompt. I gave it a 5 megabit file with some telemetry data. Didn't tell it what it was about or what track it was or what the vehicle was or really what to do with it. I just said, hey, take this. I want to analyze this data visually. And I want you to be able to essentially slice and dice the data in a way that makes sense for this motor racing data. And
so you're pulled up, but essentially you're saying, here's the application I want, and here's the data. But you don't say what track or where it is or what it looks like. And Fable on its own, this is what shocked me, was able to produce the track map.
Yes.
Just from the accelerometer data, I'm assuming. Or is it GPS coordinates as well? How smart is this?
Both. So if you're looking on the screen, what we're sharing here right now is the data analysis tool on the bottom left. We've got the track information. That is the track. It's called Thunder Hill in Northern California. So it has worked out what the track looks like. It's mapped onto it. It might be hard to see on the screen, but it's color-coded various different speeds, which is kind of interesting. So what you want to do, like if you're looking at this, you might realize, hey, you know, my 4th lap I think was pretty quick, and then my 10th lap was pretty quick, but my fastest lap was this, but I'm not sure why. And so you got a bunch of data that you want to kind of visualize and slice and dice. And I'll give you just another kind of illustration of it. When you're racing around a track, they generally split it into sectors, like into 3 sectors. And so you can have an optimal lap where you're like a best sector from that lap and this lap, and you're trying to go around the track as quickly as possible. I didn't tell it to do any of that. Right. So it's broken up the track into sectors. You can see my optimal lap. And then I can do various different comparisons. I can pick the optimal lap, which is a lap I didn't actually do, versus my fastest lap and see where the differences are.
This is fantastic. There's a company that produces software like this for the application. And what you said today is that this application is more performant. Your one-shotted version is more performant than the out-of-the-box software that comes from the company that produces this data.
Yeah, 100%. You can buy kind of the amateur version all the way up to the professional version of these boxes that track the telemetry and visualize it for you. This particular logging is probably at the lower end of the market scale, so it's not like it's the IndyCar Formula One version of it. It's one-shotted for me. It has generated something a little less sophisticated, but one shot out of the gates has come up with something better. And the reason I asked it this is because the version that I'm using just isn't good enough. It doesn't, without getting into too much complexities, it doesn't help me compare lap A to lap B in a way that actually makes sense. I didn't tell this what the issue was, right? So it should measure by distance rather than time. And so it worked out measuring by distance is the best way to compare this information. And again, one shot. So 1 paragraph worth of instruction I gave to it. So it did take a little while. It took about 8 or 9 minutes to generate.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, Ian's a former PM. You can tell. Like 8 minutes.
Yeah.
Can we go faster?
Yeah. So What did I change with it? Honestly, the font at the bottom here was a little bit small, and I made one other tweak, which I said, let me allow, can I visualize this lap here, this optimal lap?
We very much crossed the boundary from, hey, this is interesting or cool to see what I could play with or build prototypes. This has built something that is useful for something that there is very well-built, purpose-built software, and it's been 8 minutes. So, the rest of the online discourse that I've been tracking over the last couple hours since it came out, and very much like this model is intensely good. A lot of people have been using it in trial mode and kind of they've embargoed it and they started talking about it. It's just far better. It's still got its ups and downs. And I think there are a few caveats. And I think let's talk about why it's called Fable and why you didn't use Mythos, because it's derived from the Mythos model, but it's different. And so I wrote down some notes based off the Anthropic press release, which is quite good and has a lot of really cool stuff in it. But first of all, it has two kind of safety measures. One is called anti-distillation. So when there are high volume attacks by usually China, what they do is they ask it a bunch of questions, and that produces extraordinarily relevant training data that makes the Chinese models much better. And so when this model gets attacked in that way, what it does is it downgrades to Opus 4.8. And like, it's Opus 4.8 is bad. That'll set them back years. And so it's like, I'm using Opus 4.8 every day. It's the top model in our product. And they're like, you know what we do to punish people who try to distill from us? We use Opus 4.8.
Opus 4.8 is about 4 weeks old.
Yeah, exactly. So the 4-week-old model is so bad that's the punishment for distillation. And but basically what it means is that any of the frontier level capabilities, they've already distilled 4.5, which is, I think, 4.8, 4.5. There wasn't a huge jump. Moving from 4.8 to 5, really, they're trying to talk about this is a major jump in capability. They've been talking about the Mythos capability. But in Fable, they've kind of hobbled it in a way that if they see high volumes, they take it down to 4.8. And if you ask it anything about cybersecurity or biology, they will also put you down to 4.8. And what people who've used it said is that this Fable, if you use it in the Mythos mode, is it extremely knowledgeable about cybersecurity. It's not extraordinarily capable in software development compared to 4.8. It's better. It has better scores and better metrics. It's just much smarter. But when you go to things like cybersecurity or synthetic biology, it's incredibly knowledgeable. So they've clearly put a huge amount of effort here into like these things that they consider these huge risks, which is foreign actors hacking our critical infrastructure, which is why they did Project Glasswing, which is where companies can use the unrestricted Mythos model to solve cybersecurity issues. But if you're using Fable and you try to ask it, how do I hack something? It will immediately knock you down to 4.8, and in many cases will push you out. And that's it's very trigger happy on that. The other thing is it's very good at biology, and they talked a lot about some of the activities they used the full Mythos model for around biology. And one I thought was very interesting was artificial viruses. And so the idea of these artificial viruses is they're a very good way to deliver kind of similar to the mRNA delivery mechanism. So instead of having a capsule, you put some kind of mRNA or RNA. I don't exactly know biology, and I can't ask Fable because Fable will say, "Hey, let's not talk about that." But so I already upgraded to Fable. I'm not going to do any more research. But these viruses can be very valuable for delivering treatments, but they could also, in a malicious actor who had access to Mythos, give you cancer or anything. I mean, it's pretty delicate. You don't want to mess with your DNA. So they've hobbled that. And so if you try to access Fable and talk about biology, it will knock you down again. But on the other hand, they've used Mythos and they've discovered a bunch of novel proteins that they're already pursuing for novel treatments. They've used Project Glasswing to help deliver fixes for cybersecurity issues. And they've expanded that program even further and giving Mythos to more cybersecurity defense. But again, making sure the Chinese can't distill it and get all of this capability into their own open source models or their own private models that they're using to hack the US, and making sure that, someone who wanted to do a worldwide terrorist attack doesn't have the ability to design novel viruses.
So it's fairly apparent to me that, that the jagged frontier has been pushed back. Has it been pushed back as far as I believe in what they're saying in the press release? I don't think so. But it's really interesting to me now that if you want to, let's say, master AI, it's not possible to master AI, but if you want to be a sort of at the leading edge, your job now is to go ahead and work out what the jagged frontier of Fable 5 is in your space, in your job, whatever you're doing. So it just occurred to me that you and I kind of have this habit, right? As soon as something new comes out, we go play with it. We're like, oh, it's awesome. Oh, it doesn't really do that thing. Okay. So that's maybe a takeaway if you're
Yeah, no, this is a unique podcast that we're doing today, which is we're recording this 3 hours after Anthropic announced it. So we're still in the hype section. We had a bunch of things that we got stuck on with 4.8, tried them with Fable 5, and immediately said, oh man, this is far better. We have not yet got to the point where we've gotten stuck on new problems, which is that's always the cycle. New model comes out. The first few days, you're like, this is incredible. It leads to a few things that are very sustainable. And then a bunch of things where you're like, man, that's not so great. But the fact that, kind of one-shotted your application is the kind of breakthrough where like, that's done now. We don't think about that anymore. Of course, I can build a
yeah, but where it's like anything. It's like a domino, and you have new challenges. Like there's. I wrote a post about this earlier today. It's going to be a bunch of conversation the next 40 hours. Oh my God, everybody's jobs are gone. Incorrect. Why? You and I have talked about this a lot. It's, how long does it take for this stuff to diffuse? So the model is pretty good. And that sample application that I shared with you, I'm going to put it into production for me. I'm actually going to use it and probably share it with my friends. Now, to put it into production is a very different thing than the prototype that I showed you. It'll function just pretty much like that. Like I'm not going to move buttons around. It's not going to do anything different, but it's got to be deployed to a server, and there's got to be, GitHub repo, and there's got to be a bunch of things. And I'm going to add some, a couple more things. But the challenge now, the jagged frontier, if we want to think about how quickly can AI replace work that we actually need to do, in this case, there's a bunch of AI harness stuff that doesn't now exist that I need it to take. So for example, I have sort of a 3-step process. In chat, I'll work with Claude. I'll get it to do something for me. It does the thing. It builds the thing. I'm like, that's great. Now move it to Claude Code. So Claude Code's more structured. It's for writing software code and maintaining software code. And then I've got to take it from there, and I've got to push it into production, be a production environment. So let's call that 3 steps. The first step, which is the model, just writing the code. Awesome. I just showed you. It works really, really well. But in terms of it actually replacing a job, there are 2 more steps. And so the jagged frontier, I think we need to expand kind of, to use my term, expand the aperture here a little bit in terms of what we include within the infrastructure that needs to be in place to really, really make process for a bunch of different tasks and jobs.
Yeah, we should add to the breakdownpodcast.com. I believe there are more services now that are going to be directly deployed to a working website, to a working URL that's publicly facing. So you could vibe code an application, not just till it works, but vibe code it, and then your friends could use it right away. I think that whole stack is going very well. You've seen a couple of the companies that have really benefited from becoming the standard pick of database companies that are standard pick of Claude, having massive funding rounds because Claude is getting better at that entire CI/CD or your entire development lifecycle working.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's just to hone in on that one for a second. I shared the link to that application on breakneckpodcast.com. I didn't deploy that. I clicked a button in Claude, and it made it, pushed it out, so it exists on the web for you to play with. That's not an application though.
Yeah.
I need a bunch more stuff. I need control over who has access to it. I need security stuff. A bunch of that stuff's going to happen. I think we'll see that in the next.
We've been helping people build a bunch of these applications. It feels like there's just a very similar set of stuff. It's like, hey, I need a user authentication page. Hey, I need a
Password reset. I need
password reset. I need to maybe be able to
setting
manage my
pages.
users. I need a CMS for the content. For instance, my friend works over at WorkOS, and they release auth.md, and the idea is these agentically built infrastructure tools, so that when you need to authorize some users, you just kind of look at a skill, you use an MCP to go access WorkOS in this instance, and then it just automatically configures all that stuff. I don't see much of that being very far behind. And that's not the model getting better. That's a bunch of SaaS companies that sit around that workflow getting better on their own.
Yeah, and it brings me to a topic that I want to talk about, which is another bugbear of mine is user interface, right? We're consistently contorting ourselves into a chat experience to do things that we want to do. Chat's great, it's unstructured, but there's a bunch of things that we still expect in terms of how conversations actually go. And then there's a bunch of places where conversations just don't work for us to make progress, to be productive. And so there's been two interesting conversations slash rumors in the last week. The first is Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb, famously is an industrial designer, a visual designer. He is starting a new AI lab,
Uh-huh.
and the scuttlebutt says it is focused on user interaction. We will see what happens there, but I am optimistic about that. It's again probably an extension of the harness conversation, but it's really like, what are ways that we can interact with the data and the information and progress towards finishing tasks? And just to kind of highlight the point, right? If you have more than 4 or 5 conversations going in ChatGPT or Claude and you come back to them, a couple of days later, it's virtually impossible to find anything you want or need
It's
in there,
terrible.
even if there are artifacts. So there's a bunch of low-hanging fruit, but it's not an easy one. You're talking about an infinite sort of number of use cases that you need to solve for. These are all things we solve for in Web 2.0, right?
And
What's
how does Mira Murati factor in?
So Mira Murati, she came out of OpenAI. I believe she was the
One of the founders.
CTO, raised a bunch of money about 18 months ago, and essentially went quiet until recently, where she announced they are going to be launching what they call interaction models. And interaction models, as my understanding, they're still LLMs, they're still language based, but they are duplex rather than simplex. Duplex and simplex is a way of describing how information moves forwards and backwards. So Matt and I are talking in simplex mode. I'll stop, he starts. But our conversations as humans are not like that. We interrupt each other, we stop to think, we share a video, somebody comes into the room, we need to note that. LLMs don't work that way today. It's, you talk, you wait, you get an answer, and it's in that simplex mode. And they've showed some pretty impressive demos of this kind of backwards and forwards, much more human conversational way of interaction. So I'm excited about both of those because, frankly, the way we interact today is not productive, and I think the number of use cases and our general happiness with interaction with AI will go up once we begin to solve some of these problems.
Yeah, the quality of voice interaction, and the quality of visual multimodal experience is super weak. And I agree that chat is not the right place for it. But the models have been evolving so quickly that I don't think anybody's been able to nail it. So these are two, people with very good track records who have attracted a lot of capital. So hopefully they can build fast enough and complete enough that they can stay ahead of the curve. And but very likely what you'd see if they built anything good is ChatGPT and Anthropic immediately copy it. So it's a tough nut to crack. This reminds me that this week I think we have more news. Apple released, I don't know what you would call it, good Siri. So yesterday, Apple announced a new version of Siri that kind of followed up on their major kind of fake AI announcements from 2024, where they announced Siri is going to be good and we're going to have all this Apple intelligence. And they had released a bunch of new hardware on the phones that had all of this AI acceleration. But when they actually released the AI capabilities, everyone was completely overwhelmed to the point where people were fired over it. I mean, because people considered it such a betrayal that Apple releases real stuff in their announcements. And so yesterday, I think a year and a half later, however much it's been, they finally have the Gemini models that they partnered with Google integrated into Siri, as well as some really interesting other stuff. And so I only was able to look at the highlights. I didn't spend my whole afternoon watching the event. But Siri is much more performant. There's a lot of thoughtful work around these on-device models, which are these distilled Gemini that they've put on device. That means that you'll get very fast latency without great network and get certain amount of AI capabilities. But for the harder things, it gracefully pushes it off to the server. You get the full Gemini 3.5 or whatever they're on that does the rest of the work. And so one example they gave is that you can kind of preview what an edited AI image would look like. And in the example they gave, you took one picture and then they moved to a completely different perspective. And the on-device was good enough to give you a pretty good view of what that would be. And then it went off, and 2-3 seconds later, however long, it came back with the final version, which had the full resolution from like a much more powerful offline model. So that's like a really interesting type of interaction that Apple could do because they have the on-device capability and the full control of the stack. And so that was released yesterday. Very exciting. A lot of core OS capabilities of working between many applications, looking at your file system on your Apple device, moving across Apple devices with a consistent set of AI workflows. So I think Apple has really invested very little money into AI and if they can continue with these type of things, if they actually, when they release them, are good, which was not the case last time, then you might see Apple stock bump up quite a bit and they become a more essential part of the AI story.
Yeah, you know what's really interesting to me is it's the leading edge of kind of the local slash private AI.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't a place, I don't know. It's a long time since I tried any local AI, like probably a year.
I think a
And
year and a half ago, everyone got excited that you could buy a Mac Mini or some Mac Pro and then run local models locally. But then they realized that 25 tokens a second is very, very slow, or whatever the number is, relative to what you can get from just going to Claude.ai/new, and you get a massive new model really fast. I think we're all trying to figure out what AI is, and having a slightly slower, cheaper version is way less fun than playing with Fable on day
well,
one.
so the reason it's making me think about local stuff is there's a bunch of places in the world where legal tech, fintech stuff, where you don't really want to be sharing a bunch of information with
Mhm.
a cloud-based LLM. But there hasn't really been a solution locally for those types of use cases or even privately. When you marry that with something else, which is when you try and use an AI for your own business internally, where you have proprietary ways of doing things and running your business and your own sets of data that frankly the cloud-based LLM has no understanding of. Our buddy Mark Hainan was alluding to this when we had him on. There's a pretty big use case for very specialized narrow language models that still have the generalized understanding, but have been trained on exactly how your business works. And you most definitely would want to try and keep that information or that model close at hand. What's been missing is any type of proof point for us to say, yeah, that's actually doable. And it's sort of interesting when I go back to consumers and the phone now. Will Apple start to train us a little bit and make us aware of like, oh, this data is super private. It's yours. It's on the phone. It's doing a good job for you. It's limited, but it's doing a good job. So it might
Well,
kind of awaken some awareness to
you
the
start to
conversation
see
again.
types of applications where security and things are becoming important. Microsoft did a big release. Has it been since our last podcast? I mean, everything's happened. And a wearable camera device where the camera is actually on the side, so it's not constantly there, but it's a camera that you can turn around and give the AI access to your surroundings when you choose to. And so I think things like wearable devices that sit on your desk that are AI specific that have their own workflows, but it's pretty hard to get around. I think for the local inference, it's pretty hard to get around the fact that AI is extremely compute intensive. That compute is in very high demand, and it's very hard as an individual to keep your local computer working at anything higher than 5 or 6% of the time doing inference in a normal workflow. So that's where the cloud is extremely good, is that it can keep those servers humming at a far higher amount, especially with the long latency that's acceptable with AI. You could have somebody in Turkey when they using the servers, and then when they go to bed, somebody in the United States, and then somebody after that is using it out of Asia. And it's just very hard to make the economics work where you're only running a local inference machine 5% of the time. Cloud's just intrinsically good there.
So, one more. We are 25 minutes in, and we haven't even talked about OpenAI and their IPO announcement.
Yeah, I don't think the S1's public. I didn't see it publicly, but OpenAI announced, we all knew they were going to, and there's been talk about this for months, but OpenAI announced that they're going to do an IPO. We don't have the price yet, I don't believe. But they are starting to take the S1 around to investors to figure out demand for OpenAI. Now, the price to beat, I think SpaceX is going to do something like 1.75 billion or 1.75 trillion. I always see these people make a mistake. They're like, they can't get it through their head that the numbers are billions instead of millions. And here I
Yeah.
am, trillions instead of billions. So 1.75 trillion for SpaceX. We've heard numbers as high as 2 trillion for Anthropic. And OpenAI is, as much as it's had the kind of leadership position threatened by Anthropic, is still OpenAI and have 900 million users and you know, best in class models on any given week. They might be ahead of Anthropic. So if you're going to value Anthropic at 2 trillion, it's hard to imagine OpenAI not getting roughly the same price.
It's going to be a busy summer for the investment bankers. We'll be coming back from the Hamptons and Nantucket and wherever else early. Three of these things running at the same time. So to wrap it up, Matt, you had something that caught your attention this week. Want to share it?
Yeah, just a couple few hours ago, I guess like Monday night, which was yesterday, a helicopter was shot down somewhere in the Iran conflict, and people landed in the water. And a local, I think they're Austin-based company, Saronic, their autonomous boat went into this, pretty highly contested water area, the Strait of Hormuz or whatever, and picked up the pilots. And so I think it's a pretty big milestone of a autonomous vehicle going into a situation where you wouldn't want to use humans and doing that work. And so it's one of those things that company only started maybe 3.5 years ago, and it's already making a difference in live conflict. We would expect to see far more adoption of these types of drone capabilities. And this is like a full-size boat. Like imagine a big speedboat that autonomously went in. You can imagine there's a lot of electronic warfare. There's local conditions it has to account for. And it was able to do that successfully and grab these guys when you didn't want to send in, a bunch of Marines that could potentially get killed. And so that's a pretty big milestone for the U.S. military, that you would see this type of drone operation, not offensively, but defensively and to save people versus, just drop bombs, which is much more difficult in some sense because the ocean is much more unpredictable and you had to find these people versus just, using satellite guidance on a high flying drone. So pretty big day for the military.
It's got a bunch more use cases in kind of civilian life too, right? You've putting less humans at risk to save other humans in the sea.
Is pretty hard for non-military uses precisely because it's so damaging. You have salt water.
Uh,
Water's bad, and the salt water is even worse. Um, but yeah, for military, it's I think you look at the Strait of Hormuz. What if we had 50,000 of those boats? So it takes away a lot of the disadvantages the U.S. has in asymmetric conflicts, where the Afghanistan, they would lose 20 people for the possibility of killing one soldier. Well, now once you put robots in, we have all the advantage of our industrial capacity and none of these asymmetric things where we care about one loss.
well, you're on vacation, Matt. Let's end it on a positive note. It sounds like these pilots were saved and they're great. And we're fans of a good piece of technology. And like good technologists will ignore the second order impacts that are possibly negative.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's land it there, man. Let's get you back to your vacation.
I know I got to get to the beach.
for-
I'm going to need to get in text. So I'll see you next time, Ian.
All right. Watch out for those autonomous boats on the beach. Other than that, enjoy yourself.
I think it might be jellyfish. Yeah.
All right. We'll see you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.